So picture this. You are stepping into a courtroom to defend your freedom. You're facing actual years in prison.
Yeah, a terrifying situation for anybody.
Right. But instead of citing past legal precedents or, I don't know, looking for a loophole in the penal code, you just walk up to the judge and present the laws of thermodynamics.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You pull out these dense white papers on complex network theory and explain that, according to the fundamental physics of reality, the crime they're accusing you of is mathematically impossible.
I mean, that sounds exactly like a scene from a sci-fi thriller. You'd think the judge would either be like completely mesmerized by the data or just throw the case out entirely because the prosecution's narrative just got completely dismantled by a physicist.
Exactly. Except the judge ignores the math completely and sentences you to prison anyway.
Which is just wild.
It really is. And that is exactly the scenario we're unpacking today. So, welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We know you're insanely curious and want to get straight to the core insights without drowning in all that information overload.
Yeah, we've got a truly fascinating stack of sources for you today.
We really do. We're looking at official legal rulings, psychological analyses, and this remarkable and frankly haunting blood letter written from inside a prison cell.
Right. And these documents piece together the staggering real-world case of Dr. Chen Jingwan. He's a physics PhD, a complex systems researcher who was sentenced to 20 months in prison in China.
20 months. And the action that triggered this entire legal avalanche. Retweeting content on X, which, was Twitter at the time.
As if it's just hitting a retweet button.
Yeah. Now, just to set the ground rules for our exploration today, because these source materials contain some highly politically charged content. I'm talking references to U.S. politicians, Chinese leadership, international relations, all of it.
It's a lot of heavy stuff.
It is. So we are keeping this deep dive strictly impartial. We are not here to endorse or condemn any political viewpoints from any side of the spectrum. Our mission is simply to act as your guides, unpacking the incredibly complex legal, scientific, and psychological arguments contained directly within these documents.
Exactly. We are treating this stack of sources like a diagnostic report. It's a lens through which we can observe how modern bureaucratic systems process information, how they handle dissent, and how they occasionally collide violently with the laws of science.
And it really is a violent collision, isn't it? This isn't just a story about an unfair trial. It's a situation where theoretical physics and evolutionary psychology literally go to war inside a courtroom.
Yeah, it's unprecedented.
But okay, before we get into the heavy mathematics of his defense, we need to establish the baseline. Like, what exactly was Dr. Chen accused of doing? What was the specific logic the court used to justify locking him up?
So the official charge leveled against Dr. Chen was picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Picking quarrels.
Yeah. According to the police records and our sources, authorities raided his home, subjected him to a grueling 24-hour interrogation, and confiscated his digital devices.
For retweeting.
Right. The prosecution's quote-unquote ironclad evidence rested entirely on a series of retweets he made using a VPN to access his Twitter account. And there's a critical detail we need to highlight right up front here.
What's that?
Dr. Chen's account had fewer than 100 followers.
Wait, less than 100 people?
Less than 100.
So we aren't talking about some massive influencer with millions of eyes on their feed, but what kind of material was he actually putting in front of that tiny audience that warranted a full-blown police raid?
Well, in his defense documents, Dr. Chen methodically categorized the evidence against him into 4 distinct buckets. The first bucket was simply art.
Art? Like paintings?
Basically, it included things like sharing the Umbrella Girl comic illustration from the Hong Kong protests, along with various satirical political cartoons.
Okay, let's unpack this. Art and satire. What else?
The second bucket was subjective emotion. So these were images of candlelight vigils or short posts just expressing his personal frustration with social issues.
Okay, yeah.
The third bucket was theory and commentary. Here, he was linking to philosophical articles and international political speeches. Like, he retweeted Donald Trump's speeches critiquing communism and Mike Pompeo's commentary on Sino-U.S. relations.
Got it. And the last one.
The fourth bucket was historical facts. This included posts discussing specific edits that had been made to Mao Zedong's published works over the years and a photograph of a retired official's pay stub.
Okay, if I'm looking at those 4 buckets, charging someone with spreading fake news or rumors for retweeting a comic book illustration or a picture of a candle, it just doesn't compute.
It really doesn't.
It's like charging an art critic with perjury for writing a review of a surrealist painting. A cartoon or a feeling isn't an empirical claim about reality. You literally cannot fact-check subjective emotion.
And that is the exact logical gap Dr. Chen pointed out. In a standard criminal case involving the spread of dangerous misinformation, the prosecution carries a very specific burden.
Right.
They have to prove two things. First, that the information was objectively false. And second, that the defendant knew it was false and spread it with malicious intent to cause harm.
Malicious intent is the key there.
Exactly. But the documents show the prosecutors had absolutely zero evidence regarding Dr. Chen's internal state of mind. They couldn't prove he had any malicious intent whatsoever.
So, if they couldn't prove he intended to cause harm, and they couldn't fact-check half of the material because it was subjective art or emotion, how on earth did the judge secure a conviction?
Well, the court employed what the sources describe as the high education paradox.
The what?
Yeah. In the official verdict, the judge ruled that because Dr. Chen holds a PhD in physics and possesses a high level of education, he should have known that the content he was interacting with was false or subversive.
You're kidding.
I'm not. Therefore, they concluded, he must have acted with malice.
Wait. They used his degree against him.
Yes, they did.
They substituted what they thought he should know, based on his intelligence, for actual legal proof of what he did know.
Precisely. They essentially argued that ignorance or just casual browsing wasn't a valid defense for someone with his academic pedigree. His intelligence became the very mechanism they used to presume his guilt.
Wow. Think about the implications of that for a second. Imagine your own advanced degrees, or even just your natural curiosity and professional training, being legally weaponized against you like that.
It's terrifying.
That's a complete inversion of the justice system. The court is literally saying, you're too smart to be innocent.
It fundamentally breaks the presumption of innocence. And more importantly, it completely divorces the legal ruling from objective, measurable reality.
Yeah. And when a legal system abandons objective reality like that, you can see why scientists would decide to just throw out the legal playbook entirely.
Right, absolutely.
If the court refuses to operate on legal precedent or basic logic, Dr. Chen decides to force them to argue with the fabric of the universe. He grounds his defense in the laws of physics.
And he didn't just use basic high school physics either. He leaned into his specific expertise as a complex systems researcher.
Right.
Dr. Chen modeled the social network environment of Twitter using a concept called self-organized criticality, or SOC, alongside avalanche dynamics.
Okay, let's dig into how those concepts actually work, because applying them to a social media feed is just fascinating.
So, self-organized criticality is a theory that was proposed in the late 1980s by physicists studying how complex systems naturally evolve toward a tipping point. The classic analogy here is a sand pile.
A sand pile?
Yeah. Imagine you are dropping grains of sand onto a table one by one. Eventually, they form a pile, and the sides of that pile get steeper and steeper.
Right, until it gets so steep that one single grain of sand causes a whole side to collapse.
Exactly. That state, right before the collapse, where the system is hyper unstable, is the critical state. Once a system hits that point, a tiny perturbation causes a massive cascading event, which physicists call an avalanche.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Right. In Dr. Chen's case, the prosecution was essentially arguing that his retweets were the grains of sand that caused a catastrophic societal avalanche, or, as they termed it, a severe public order disruption.
But Dr. Chen brings math into the courtroom to prove his specific sand grain couldn't possibly cause a collapse. How does he actually measure that?
He used network science, where a retweet is modeled as a branching process. For a single post to cause a systemic avalanche across a whole network, the average branching ratio needs to be greater than 1. You might actually recognize this from epidemiology as the R0 value.
Oh, yeah. We heard a lot about R0 during the pandemic. If a virus has an R0 greater than 1, it means every infected person infects more than one other person on average, so the spread grows exponentially.
Spot on.
But if it's less than 1, the virus eventually hits a dead end and just dies out.
Exactly. And the same mathematics govern the spread of information online. Dr. Chen proved that as a marginal node, meaning a user with fewer than 100 followers and virtually zero historical engagement, his R0 value was a tiny, tiny fraction of 1.
So nowhere near causing an exponential spread.
Not even close. In physics terms, he existed in a deep subcritical zone. And to prove this wasn't just a theory, he invoked the Galton-Watson theorem.
Okay, I don't know that one. What does the Galton-Watson theorem do in this context?
It's a fundamental concept in probability theory. Originally, it was created way back in the 1800s to understand why aristocratic family surnames were going extinct.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the math basically shows that if the average number of offspring passing on a name is less than 1, the probability of that family line dying out isn't just likely. As time stretches on, the probability of extinction approaches absolute certainty. Dr. Chen applied this exact same mathematical proof to his retweets. Because his branching ratio was so far below 1, the chance of his posts causing a macro-level network avalanche wasn't just small, it was mathematically 0. His retweets were guaranteed by the laws of probability to go extinct almost immediately.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here, because the prosecution might argue about the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
We've all heard the idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas.
Right. It's a very common trope.
So even with a tiny audience, couldn't Dr. Chen's retweet be that one butterfly flap that reaches the right person who reaches another person and eventually causes a massive disruption?
What's fascinating here is Dr. Chen actually anticipated that exact counter-argument. And his rebuttal is brilliant because he explains the often misunderstood prerequisite of the butterfly effect.
Which is?
For a butterfly's wings to cause a hurricane, the entire system must already be in a highly unstable, supercritical state. The atmosphere has to already be primed for a storm.
Oh, I see. So going back to the sand pile analogy, the pile has to already be impossibly steep.
Yes. Dr. Chen pointed out that if the flap of a butterfly's wings destroys the system, it is the fault of the system's inherent catastrophic instability. It's not the fault of the butterfly.
It makes perfect sense.
Furthermore, he looked at the topology of systemic risk. He argued that the real hub nodes creating this terrifying instability aren't random citizens with 50 followers. The real risk comes from massive centralized nodes abusing their power-like judicial organs, fabricating charges, and ignoring due process.
Wow. So he essentially flips the prosecution's entire premise right back at them.
He does.
He's telling the court, I'm not the structural danger here. The fact that you can arbitrarily weaponize the law without evidence means you are the ones piling the sand dangerously high.
Precisely.
Because that abuse of power erodes public trust, which is what actually pushes a society toward a supercritical, avalanche-ready state.
It's an incredibly bold defense. I mean, he used peer-reviewed complex systems theory to mathematically prove that the court itself was the actual threat to public order.
It's a watertight, falsifiable defense. So why did the judge completely ignore it and send him to prison anyway?
Because, as the psychological analyses in our sources reveal, what happened in that courtroom wasn't a debate about facts or mathematics or evidence at all.
It wasn't.
No. It was a profound psychological collision between two completely different ways of processing reality.
Oh. This is where we have to look at the case through the lens of psychology, specifically the big 5 personality traits. If I'm reading the profile right, Dr. Chen represents what psychologists might call the scholar personality.
Right. Dr. Chen exhibits extremely high openness to experience. In the Big 5 model, people high in openness have this intrinsic drive to gather diverse information, explore novel ideas, and most importantly, they can tolerate ambiguity.
They don't need everything to be black and white.
Exactly. He also scores very high in autonomy. He is loyal to objective truth, way above social conformity.
And when we look at the other side of the bench, the judicial officials exhibit a textbook authoritarian personality. The sources describe this profile as having incredibly low openness to experience, high obedience to authority, and crucially, a very high need for cognitive closure.
The need for cognitive closure is really the key to understanding the judge's reaction here.
How so?
It's defined as a deep-seated psychological desire to find a firm, definitive answer to a question purely to avoid the discomfort of ambiguity.
If I'm understanding this right, it's not that the officials necessarily sat down and hatched some mustache-twirling evil plot.
No, not usually.
It's that ambiguity, like a surreal political cartoon or an academic debating multiple sides of an international conflict, causes their brains genuine psychological distress.
Yes, it's perceived as a threat.
And slamming down a gavel, labeling the confusing thing a crime, and locking it away is just the fastest way to relieve that internal anxiety. They use the legal system as a tool to soothe their own cognitive distress.
Exactly. And this taps directly into evolutionary psychology. You have to remember, human brains didn't evolve to manage global digital bureaucracies or, navigate international cyber law.
Right. They evolved in small, tight-knit, hunter-gatherer tribes on the savannah?
Exactly. And in that ancient environment, Dr. Chen's behavior triggers a very specific mechanism. He is exhibiting the cognitive exploration module.
Which means?
For a tribe to survive, you need certain individuals who are willing to wander over the next hill, try a new berry, or observe a neighboring group just to figure out what resources or threats are out there.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because to the judicial officials who are operating with those same Stone Age brains, his deviation from the tribe's strict ideological narrative triggers an entirely different and much more violent evolutionary reflex.
Right, status defense and group purification.
Yeah. It's like an ancient tribe sitting around a fire. One member wanders too far into the dark, learns something unfamiliar, and comes back to talk about it. The tribal elders don't see a researcher expanding their knowledge base. They see an infection.
A literal pathogen.
Exactly. They see a mortal threat to the tribe's cohesion. Their deepest, oldest instinct is to banish or destroy the outlier, just to maintain order. That primal tribal reflex completely short-circuits the modern prefrontal cortex requirement for slow thinking, gathering evidence, and respecting due process.
Which brings up a pretty dark question about the human mind. What happens to the individual who gets crushed by this evolutionary mismatch?
Yeah.
Because the system didn't just disagree with Dr. Chen, they subjected him to 24-hour interrogations, sensory deprivation, and imprisonment. In psychological literature, putting a human in an environment where they are punished randomly regardless of their actions usually induces learned helplessness.
Oh man, learned helplessness. That's that terrifying state where a subject like a dog in a shock collar experiment realizes they have no control over the pain, so they just lay down and stop trying to escape altogether. Their spirit completely breaks.
Exactly.
But that didn't happen to Dr. Chen.
No, it didn't. The psychological analysis indicates he experienced the exact opposite, profound post-traumatic growth.
How did he manage that?
The mechanism behind this is his unusually high internal locus of control.
Okay, let's break that down. How does an internal locus of control actually protect a brain during 24-hour interrogations?
Well, when someone has an external locus of control, they believe their fate is determined by their environment. When the environment becomes a prison cell, they collapse. But someone with an internal locus of control believes they govern their own inner world.
Right.
Dr. Chen realized he couldn't control the physical environment or the interrogators, but he could control his perception of them. He cognitively reframed his entire trauma. He famously stated that he viewed his prison cell not as a cage, but as an observation deck to study the pathological behavior of the judicial system.
Oh, wow. That is an unbelievable psychological pivot.
It really is.
He couldn't do his research in a university lab, so he literally turned his captors into his test subjects. He maintained his core identity as a scholar, just observing their authoritarian reflexes in real time.
He essentially detached himself from the immediate physical suffering by treating it as data collection.
But, while he is surviving psychologically, what is happening to the actual paperwork? Because when evolutionary panic and a desperate need for cognitive closure completely hijack a modern bureaucracy, the legal documents themselves must reflect that breakdown, right?
Oh, they absolutely do. The autopsy of this institutional failure is laid bare in the official court documents, particularly the second instance or appellate ruling.
What happened with the appeal?
Dr. Chen appealed his conviction, but the appellate court dismissed his appeal without even granting him a trial. And the written justification they used to dismiss it is just staggering.
But I'm bracing myself. What was their reasoning?
The court officially noted in the documentation that the defendant failed to provide new evidence of his innocence.
Wait. They blamed the man locked in his cell for not proving he was innocent.
Yes.
That completely inverts the most foundational principle of modern law. It is always the prosecution's burden to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. By demanding Dr. Chen prove a negative from inside a prison cell, the court effectively formalized its own breakdown. They documented their complete abandonment of legal norms.
And what about the prosecution's original evidence? If the burden was supposedly on them in the first trial, what was the actual link they drew between his retweets and the so-called severe public order disruption?
Well, there was no link. The evidence chain was essentially a void. The prosecutor on the case, Gis Bin, is on the record admitting that he didn't actually verify whether any of the retweets were false.
He didn't verify them.
No, his justification was that he, quote, felt they were rumors.
He felt they were rumors. An entire prosecution based on a vibe.
Yes. And to establish that these posts caused a severe disruption, the court didn't look at analytics or web traffic data or reports of actual offline protests.
What did they look at then?
They relied entirely on subjective situation explanations that were drafted by the police themselves. It was a perfect circle of bureaucratic logic. The police wrote a memo saying it caused a disruption, so the court ruled it caused a disruption.
Wow. When you look at how easily that evidence chain was fabricated, it just hits you how incredibly vulnerable we all are to these systems.
It's a sobering realization.
It really is. When the people operating the levers of power value ideological obedience over objective reality, the rules and procedures meant to protect you can easily be reverse engineered to punish you. It ceases to be a justice system and just becomes an immune system designed to attack anything that doesn't share the host's exact DNA.
And the tragic irony is that Dr. Chen actually provided the ultimate empirical proof of this upon his release.
Oh, right. After 20 months in prison, what did he actually find?
He got out and immediately logged back into his X account. All of the posts, the umbrella cartoons, the philosophical links, the historical facts, the posts that had supposedly caused a catastrophic disruption of public order were still sitting right there in his timeline.
And what did the engagement metrics look like? Let me guess.
0 engagement, 0 retweets, 0 likes. There were no official refutations or fact checks from the state. The posts had literally just sat there in a complete vacuum for nearly 2 years.
Unbelievable.
The macroscopic avalanche, the societal collapse that the prosecutors claimed he ignited, never existed anywhere outside of their own panicked minds. 20 months of a man's life were taken for a mathematical impossibility.
So let's take a breath and recap the sheer scope of what we've covered today. We started with Dr. Chen Jingyuan, a complex systems researcher whose home was rated simply for sharing images and ideas with a tiny digital audience.
Right.
We explored how he threw out the traditional legal playbook, utilizing self-organized criticality and the Galton-Watson theorem to mathematically guarantee that his actions couldn't possibly have harmed society.
And then we looked at why that bulletproof logic failed. We analyzed the evolutionary mismatch, observing how an authoritarian mind's desperate need for cognitive closure and tribal group purification reflexes can just violently hijack a modern judicial process.
And finally, we saw the paper trail of that hijacking, where prosecutors literally admitted they operated on feelings rather than facts, and appellate courts demanded a prisoner prove his own innocence, culminating in a 20-month sentence for posts that literally no one even looked at.
Ultimately, the blood letter Dr. Chen wrote from prison is much more than a personal defense file. It serves as a diagnostic report for all of us.
Yeah, it really does.
It shows exactly what happens when a complex institution loses its capacity for critical thinking, rejects diversity of thought, and allows its central hub nodes to operate without any empirical accountability.
It brings us right back to that courtroom we pictured at the very beginning. A lone physicist holding up the laws of thermodynamics, trying to explain the mechanics of reality to a Stone Age tribe that is only interested in keeping their fire burning exactly the way it always has, absolutely terrified of the shadows.
It's a chilling image, and it highlights a vulnerability in every single human institution.
It does. And it leaves us with something vital to mull over as we wrap up today. Dr. Chen's story is a glaring warning about what happens when immensely powerful modern systems are operated by Stone Age minds acting on fear and tribal reflexes.
Absolutely.
So as we look to the future, especially as we build even more complex, opaque systems like the artificial intelligence networks that will increasingly govern our data, our laws, and our lives, how do we design these institutions to be immune to that primal fear of the unknown? How do we structurally guarantee that the marginal nodes, the explorers, the artists, and the questioners, are protected and aren't blindly crushed by the terrified hub nodes of power?
Figuring out how to code tolerance for ambiguity into our systems might just be the most important complex problem we ever have to solve.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of systems and the minds that run them. We'll catch you next time.